first drew you to St. Joseph's Church, and how has your connection to the parish evolved over time?
Well, my family had moved here when I was less than a year old, so I used to attend church from the time that I could remember, Mass on Sundays at least. I used to, sometimes we went to weekday Mass as well, and eventually I would go to the school for a few years, St. Joseph's School. Now, at that point, I was more of a passive member of the parish. I guess I was probably 16 or 17, a teenager, and they asked me to start helping out with the music, so I started playing the organ at that point. And then as time went on, I was working with the choir, and since then have moved into other things. So it grew over time. That was about 65 years ago that all started.
When did you realize this history was worth documenting? Was there a particular moment or person that inspired this series?
Well, throughout the years I was talking about, I was friends with a few people in the parish. I was actually, our family was friends with one person in particular who you could consider one of the informal, not exactly founder, but mainstay of the parish. And she was kind of like a grandmother to everybody. If we were fooling around at the house, my parents would say, "Why don't you go down and see Mrs. Kochka?" Okay, that's what they would tell us. So Mrs. Kochka Ethel Kochka was a longtime resident. She used to say that she was still sleeping in the room she was born in, and that was in the 1890s. And we would go down and talk to her, and she would tell me stories. She would tell me stories about her own family, things she remembered about the church, the parish, the township, and it just grew with me. As I would listen to her, it took me years to realize how interesting that really was. So in later years, members of the parish would approach me and say, "Oh, what about this?" Or "Did you ever hear about that?" And I said, "Yeah, I did know about that." And they'd say, "Where'd you hear it from?" I said, "Well, a lot of it started with my afternoon conversations with Ethel Kochka."
So you mentioned gratitude to others who've helped. Who are some of the people or sources that kept this story alive through the years?
Well, one of the ones that I first mentioned was this woman of the parish, Ethel Kochka. Her maiden name was Ethel Tintle, and certainly her family was here for a long time. Their family had been here at least from the 1860s. But there were other people who over the years either told me stories orally or wrote them down. One name that comes to mind, I came across it more recently, was the work of a priest from the Diocese of Patterson, Monsignor Kupke. I believe he's the diocesan archivist, and he has taken the trouble to write some really interesting articles on the early history. Another one is, again, a parishioner of the parish, the descendant of a parishioner that I knew, Ann Janader. She wrote for the town paper for years. I believe she still does. And it was through her that I picked up some additional details. So it's probably a multitude of people. It would take me a while to mention them all, but those are kind of three that jump out at first.
So when you compare St. Joseph's to earlier but now inactive Catholic communities, what do you think allowed this parish to endure while others faded?
Well, it has something to do, I think, with the makeup, you might say the demographic of the group. This area was settled by people who were working, some of them in the mines. Most of them had come over from Germany, from Bavaria, Germany. They were very serious about their faith. They took it seriously. They knew that it was going to possibly cost them something to do that. And they resolved, we're just not going to give up. And because they were entrenched here in a sense for, let's call it economic reasons, they were working here, they made a home out of the place. They, in a sense, founded the township. And it was natural, I guess, for them to say, we're not going to give up on the church either.
So how did those secret gatherings in private homes shape this community's character and resilience?
Well, actually they were, I think they realized when they came here, this wasn't only a situation that existed in West Milford or only in New Jersey. It, in a sense, reflects what the church has gone through since the very beginning. You've had groups first in the early Roman times, later it was other political entities that had different objections to the church, or at least were not especially interested in it. So Catholics had gotten used to this in a certain way. And so when they came here, they were bringing, in a sense, history of 1,000 or 1,500 years ago with them, and realizing the church is not going to always be an easy time, but we're not going to give up on it. We're going to keep praying. We're going to keep talking about it. We're going to keep promoting the message that we have. And of course, in the end, we know that they triumphed, because right now we have parishes all over the state, we have parishes all over the country, and they're of course, growing by their standards and even by ours. The parishes are continuing to grow, and this has been the story of the church pretty much throughout the entire world.